Next, we hear from Prisca once more. She says this: "The winter is cruel this year. A salty, wet wind off the sea. All things are dull and moist. Nothing is dry or warm or comforting. Every surface sweats and stinks of mildew. The days are gray from dawn to darkness. We cast no shadows because we walk in shadow. There's no consolation anymore. Paul is in prison." A letter was waiting for Paul when we came back to Ephesus. It had been sent from Philippi, Lydia's seal. Aquila and I were both with Paul when the letter was read to him. Unhappy news. Lydia had finally met the man whose name is Simon, whom Jesus called Peter. He and his wife and another man, most wonderfully gross and slow, she wrote. It could have been no one but Silas. They were traveling the Via Egnatia west toward Rome, and they stopped in Philippi. Lydia offered them room in her house, and they talked. The conversation turned to Paul. "You know where the man is staying now? How is his health? Does Jesus give him the increase?" Then Peter sent one piece of information to Paul on purpose. "Tell him, James thinks he should never return to Jerusalem. The mood of the city is murderous. He will never survive." Paul snorted, a humorless joke. "When am I not in danger?" he said. Peter was also the source of a second piece of information, but this he dropped by accident, like a seed on the wayside, chit-chat. Lydia plucked it up and sent it to Paul with audible sighing. It regarded the men of the churches in Galatia. They had all been circumcised. Paul gaped at that news. "What?" he said, as if Lydia were in the room with us. "What did you say?" Nobody answered. Nobody spoke for Lydia or for Peter. Nobody spoke for the men of Galatia. "What did you say? What are you telling me?" Paul was so deeply moved that he went out and he walked through the city weeping. His motion was frail and stumbling. "Oh, my churches, he said. "Oh, my dying churches." What a wretched winter this is. Never were days so dreary. The heavens are heavy as pewter. No God can live in such a sky, and children can't breathe beneath it. The clouds are a gravestone, cold and gray. I pile blankets on me at night. I draw near my husband, and still I shiver as if I were sick. "Aquila," I say. In the middle of the night, neither of us is sleeping. I say, "Aquila, how can we get our friend out of prison? What can we do for him?" Now let's shift and hear from from Luke. Luke says this: "About this time, there arose no little stir concerning believers in Ephesus. There was a silversmith named Demetrius, who made silver shrines of Artemis, which brought a great deal of business to the craftsmen in the city. This man gathered the craftsmen together with all the people whose occupations similarly depended upon Artemis, and said to them, 'Friends, you know that from this business we have our wealth. But now you can see and hear that not only at Ephesus, but almost everywhere in Asia, this Paul has persuaded a great number of people to turn away from us by saying that a God made with hands is not a God. Now, there's the danger, not only that our trade might fall into disrepute, but also that the temple of the great goddess Artemis itself might count for nothing. Why, she could even be deposed from her magnificence, she whom Asia and the world worship. When they heard this, craftsmen, workmen, and all were enraged. They cried out, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians!" They filled the city with confusions, rushing together into the theater, dragging with them Gaius and Aristarchus, Macedonians who traveled with Paul. Paul wished to go in among the crowd, but the disciples wouldn't let him. Some of the Asiarchs, too, friends of his, sent word begging him not to venture into the theater. Now, some cried one thing and some another, for the assembly was in confusion, and most of them didn't know why they had come together. Some of the crowd prompted Alexander, whom the Jews had put forward, to speak. So Alexander motioned with his hand for silence, wishing to make a defense to the people. But as soon as they recognized that he was a Jew, with one voice, the multitudes cried out, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians! Great is Artemis of the Ephesians!" This went on for 2 hours, until one of the city clerks took the stage and quieted them. "People of Ephesus," he said, "who does not know that the city of the Ephesians is the temple keeper of the great Artemis? Who in the world doesn't know that the Ephesians are keepers of the sacred stone that fell from the sky? Seeing then that these things cannot be contradicted, you ought to calm yourselves. There is no need for rash actions, for you have brought these men here who are neither sacrilegious nor blasphemous of our goddess. It is therefore Demetrius and the craftsmen who have a complaint against anyone. And if so, the courts are open and there are proconsuls. Let them bring charges against one another. But if you seek anything further, it shall be settled in the regular assembly. For since there is no cause to justify this commotion, we're in danger of being charged with rioting today." And when he had said this, he dismissed the assembly.